Berlin Biobit, AJ. Has on initially and shot the Glenshi, and be able to acknowledge or star fish the man of the dynamo or occur on fish or bun Kate Vlega or him. I'm very pleased to be here tonight in the Glens of Antrim at the invitation of the Fish Committee and Mairead McMullen in particular to say a few words about the history of Fish the land and the personalities who founded this station a century ago. I was in Glenarm from 1994 when the Fish celebrated its 90th anniversary on a lovely summer's day just before the hurling match, and it's great to be back really in the Glens. And of course we can say that the Glens of Antrim and North Antrim in particular have always been a place apart. The Glens in many ways a bridge between Gaelic Ireland and Gaelic Scotland, with Rathlin as a kind of a bridge. A part of the province of Ulster cut off from Belfast until the famine years when the Antrim Coast Road was built as a famine relief scheme, with people like the Londonderry family involved and commemorated in plaques along the road. And this opened up the Gaelic culture of the Glens and perhaps put it at risk from a more cosmopolitan society, although it wasn't until the 1920s, even 1930s, that the last Irish speakers began to die out in Glenarm. And I think the last speaker on Rathlin only died in the last 15 years or so. And when we think of North Antrim at the turn of the 20th century, looking back to the vision, the kind of ashling of the founders over a century ago, we're looking back to a North Antrim where many of its leading public figures stood against the tide within Irish politics at that time. One thinks of the Reverend John Brown Armour of Ballymoney, the great Presbyterian Home Ruler. One thinks of Captain Jack White, the founder of the Irish Citizen Army, a man who said in his last private letter to a Northern Ireland Prime Minister in 1940, when he was rejected with his services as a kind of a drill sergeant were rejected at the beginning of World War II. I was never green, I was red. When we think of Armour, we think of a man who was born in 1841 on a day of storms. In fact, on the day that Daniel O'Connell was driven from Belfast by the Presbyterian Pope, Dr Henry Cook, because of O'Connell's support of repeal, and I realise another famous Kerry man has preceded me at this platform tonight. Armour was, in fact, to grow up in the Root district of North Antrim, where the radical spirit of 1798 and the United Irishmen is very strong. It's called Lisboa, near Ballymoney. And Armour recalled when he became a liberal and a home ruler and a land reformer in the 1890s, that his earliest memory was of an eviction scene in Lisboa, County Antrim, in the Root district, as a boy in the 1850s. And he had seen a land agent evict a man from a cottage in that district. It was a day of snow, he said, and the agent seemed fonder of a cigar and of as well kind of, if you like, clad hounds and horses than he was of the tail of the tenant who was being driven out of his farmstead, hallowed by generations. And he said, when he watched this scene and learned that the tenant had been evicted without any rights or recourse, he determined that he would use whatever breath was left to him to drive a nail into the evil system of Irish landownism. Armour became a Presbyterian minister, and he actually ministered in the Trinity Church in Ballymoney for something like 40 years. He was educated at University, or then Queen's College Cork, where he found a great spirit of liberality and friendship. And he began to embrace the idea of self-determination for Ireland, standing against the tide within the broad field of Ulster Protestantism and Irish Presbyterianism until his death in 1928. The other figure I mentioned was Jack White from Whitehall outside Roshane, perhaps 22 miles from where we are tonight in Ballycastle. White was born as scion of a landed, militaristic, unionist family. His father, Sir George White, the hero of Ladysmith in the Boer War in 1902, had been bestowed with every honour of the British Army and British government could, in fact, bestow upon him. White was educated at Sandhurst, fought in the Boer War, was granted a DSO because he said he accidentally mistook a bugle charge and thinking he was retreating, he was actually advancing, and he got the Distinguished Service Order. And indeed, he tells a story about coming upon an outpost where a young, frightened Boer, South African Dutch soldier of about 16 had been left behind when his unit had retreated. And an officer said to Captain White, "Shoot him." And he replied, "If you shoot him, I'll shoot you." And he adds in his autobiography, aptly called Misfit, "He's now a general blood officer and I'm a Bolshevik," or some such. But Jack White was to return to Ireland in 1912 as Home Rule became the major motive force on this island, and really launched himself into nationalist politics with a letter in an Ulster newspaper condemning the Unionist Party as lacking vision. He appeared in Ballymoney along with the Reverend Armour and Sir Roger Casement at a famous Protestant Home Rule rally in 1913, opposing Carsonism and the threat to partition Ireland at that time. He served in the First World War, but abandoned his station to protest against the execution of Roger Casement, his friend, in 1916. And he became really a radical Republican socialist in the 1920s and 30s. He was threatened by the Unionist government with an exclusion order, excluding him from the North, because of his support for the outdoor relief workers in Belfast in 1932. But when he agreed to drop out of politics, he was allowed to remain on his estate at Whitehall. He's actually buried in Boucher. I tell you this story to show you how unique North Antrim, and especially the Glens, are in the modern history of Ireland. But that brings us to the foundation of the Glens Fish in this very district in June 1904. I think we can say that time, place, and personalities, as so often in Irish history, were all significant. The fish was held during that crescent time, as historians call it, when the page of history is almost creased and they have to sort of unfold it, between the death of Parnell in 1891 and the 1916 Rising. And during that period of infighting,